Good Saturday morning to you. Before we get started in our Bible study, I just want to remind you that Sunday, tomorrow, we will not be having a Bible study. I'll be working on my message for tomorrow. And certainly if you're anywhere within driving distance of Mansfield, Ohio, Mary Kay and I certainly invite you to come join us in our living room. Earlier this week I had someone send me an email saying, "Hey, do you have room for 2 more people to squeeze in?" I just want you to know we always have room for you if you'd like to come and join us. So let's get to our Bible study this morning, shall we? We're taking a look at Matthew chapter 3, and I'll just read the same verses that we've been working on here for the last couple of days. In those days, John the Baptist came preaching in the wilderness of Judea, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand." For this is he who was spoken of by the prophet Isaiah when he said, "The voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make his path straight." Now John wore a garment of camel's hair and a leather belt around his waist, and his food was locust and wild honey. Then Jerusalem and all Judea and all the region about the Jordan were going out to him, and they were baptized by him in the river Jordan, confessing their sin. I'd like to camp today on this idea that this is the one in verse 3 spoken of by the prophet Isaiah when he said, "The voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make his path straight." Certainly this was Isaiah's prophecy about the one who would come actually before the Messiah. Honestly, in our modern era where we have superhighways, sometimes 6, 7, 8 lanes across and all smooth roads, it might be difficult for us to understand the importance of this. We already talked yesterday about John the Baptist preaching, and that was another word for heralding, that he was really the herald of the royalty or the king who was to come after him. But oftentimes when the herald would go out, there would also be the call for the people of the local villages to prepare the road, to make the roads smooth for the king who was to come. Again, in our modern thinking, we really struggle with this. But in my preparation for our Bible study, I came across this. In ancient times, in the East, the roads were bad. There was an Eastern proverb which said, "There are 3 states of misery: sickness, fasting, and travel." You see, before a traveler set out upon a journey, he was advised to pay all of his debts, provide for all of his dependents, give parting gifts, return all articles under trust, take money and good temper for the journey, and then bid farewell to all. The ordinary roads were no better than tracks. They were not surfaced at all because the soil of Palestine is hard and will bear the traffic of mules and asses and oxen and carts. A journey along such a road was an adventure, and indeed, if possible, an undertaking to be avoided at all costs. This is from William Barclay's commentary on Matthew. So we get this idea of the roads that were just horrible roads, and that if the king was to come, if the herald was to come ahead of time, they would be preparing the soil of the roads to make them smooth so that when the king came, it was prepared already for him and his journey would be more easy. Well, this is really what John the Baptist's function was. He was to prepare the way for the King, King Jesus. He was to begin preparing the hard roads and soil of the heart and of the soul, and to get people to begin thinking in terms of changing, repenting, being more than sorrowful, changing from their evil ways to the more righteous way. We also see here in verse 4 that John wore a garment of camel's hair and a leather belt around his waist, and that his food was locust and wild honey. Now, honestly, whenever I have ever read this in the past, I always thought that this was just an indication of how just how wild a person John the Baptist was. In other words, the kind of guy that really wouldn't be all that attractive. The kind of person that maybe you and I would just want to avoid at all costs. And you would think that the people of Jerusalem and Judea would want to avoid at all costs. Well, on Monday when we come back, we'll take a look and see, of course, that that wasn't the case, that people came to him in droves. No, this reference to the camel's hair garment and to the big leather belt is actually another reference back to Elijah. If you read back through 2 Kings, you'll see that this is exactly the kind of dress that Elijah would wear. So throughout this first introduction to John the Baptist, Matthew, as clearly as he can say it, is telling his readers that this is the Elijah who was to come, heralding, preaching the good news of the King, making the rough roads straight, preparing the way for King Jesus. I hope that you have a really terrific day today on this Saturday, that you go to church tomorrow, and that you rejoice and worship with all of your heart and prepare your heart for the King. I'll talk with you again on Monday.